On January 28, 2026, the state of Texas plans to end the life of a man who didn't just commit a brutal double murder. He once walked out of jail like he belonged there. No disguise, no force, just confidence. Charles Victor Thompson has spent nearly 27 years on death row, not only for killing two people in a jealous rage, but for what he did afterward. He tried to erase witnesses, blamed doctors for a woman's death, and exposed one of the most humiliating failures in Texas jail history. To some, he's a remorseless manipulator. To others, a man who insists the system got it wrong. But before the escape, before the trials, before the excuses, there was one night in 1998 where everything collapsed. And it started with a woman who tried to leave. Before Charles Victor Thompson became a name tied to death row and national headlines, he looked like someone who blended in effortlessly. He grew up in an upper-middle-class suburb outside Houston, had a stable family, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made people lower their guard. He was good-looking, smooth-talking, and knew exactly how to present himself when it mattered. But behind that image was a life already coming apart. By his mid-20s, Thompson was drinking heavily every day and feeding a growing cocaine habit. The combination wasn't occasional, it was routine. Friends would later say his moods swung fast, from charming to explosive, often without warning. When things didn't go his way, anger took over. Work was inconsistent, responsibility was optional, and blame was always someone else's problem. Thompson expected loyalty, attention, and control, especially from the people closest to him. When he felt disrespected or ignored, he didn't back down, he escalated. And nowhere did that side of him show more clearly than in his relationship with the woman who would soon realise that leaving him might be the most dangerous decision of her life. Denise Hlip was 39 years old and trying to put her life back on stable ground. She was a mother, a hard worker, and someone who wanted peace more than drama. When she met Charles Thompson at a moving company in 1997, he seemed like a fresh start, charming, attentive, the kind of man who said all the right things early on. He moved in quickly, too quickly. And not long after, the charm began to fade. Thompson grew possessive, then controlling. Jealousy turned into anger, and anger turned into violence. During outbursts, he punched walls, kicked appliances, and left holes scattered throughout the house. He rarely worked, relying on Denise and her roommate to cover the bills. When money became an issue, his temper exploded. Friends and roommates saw what was happening. They heard the screaming. They saw Denise shaken, bruised, and terrified. On one occasion, a roommate tried to step in and was thrown to the ground. When she reached for the phone, the line was dead. Thompson had ripped it out of the wall. Denise never reported him. She didn't press charges. Like so many people trapped in abusive relationships, she believed the apologies. She hoped the promises meant something. But by early 1998, even she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Charles Thompson wasn't going to change. So Denise made the decision he could never accept. She left him. And she didn't just leave, she chose someone else. Darren Kaine was never supposed to be part of this story. He wasn't looking for trouble, and he had no idea how dangerous Denise's past really was. At 30 years old, Darren was steady, employed, and well-liked. He worked as a bartender, the kind of guy people trusted and felt comfortable around. Compared to Charles Thompson, he was calm, patient, and grounded. Denise met Darren at the bar she frequented after leaving Thompson. What started as friendship slowly turned into something more. For Denise, it felt like a chance to breathe again. For Thompson, it felt like betrayal. The night of April 29th, 1998, tensions finally boiled over. Thompson had been drinking heavily, spiralling deeper into anger. Phone calls turned into threats. Darren sensed something was wrong when Thompson started harassing him directly. Worried that Denise was in danger, Darren called a friend and said he was heading to her apartment to help. When Darren arrived, Thompson was already there. The confrontation turned physical fast. Darren, sober and stronger, overpowered Thompson and left him bruised and humiliated. A neighbour heard screaming and called police. When a deputy arrived, everyone was outside, shaken but calm. Thompson was clearly the aggressor. As Thompson stormed away, he hurled insults and threats. Then he looked directly at Darren and asked a question that cut through the night like a warning no one fully understood. "Do you want to die?" The deputy ordered Thompson to leave and warned him not to return. Thompson drove off into the dark. But the humiliation stayed with him, and instead of letting it go, he decided to come back. For the next 3 hours, Charles Thompson didn't cool off. He stewed. The beating, the humiliation, the way Denise had stood beside another man, it replayed over and over in his head. And sometime before dawn, he made a decision that would seal 2 fates. Around 6 a.m., Thompson returned to Denise's apartment. This time, he wasn't there to argue. He was armed. He kicked in the front door, shattering the frame, and rushed inside. There was no warning, no struggle. Forensic evidence would later show that Thompson fired 4 shots into Darren Kaine's neck and chest. The damage was catastrophic. Darren collapsed almost immediately. He never had a chance. But Thompson wasn't finished. He reloaded the gun, turned toward Denise, and spoke calmly. He told her he could shoot her too. Then he pressed the barrel against her face and pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through her cheek, destroying her dentures and nearly severing her tongue. Blood poured from her mouth, but Denise was still alive. She was conscious, and she knew exactly who had done this. Thompson fled the apartment, dumped the weapon in a nearby creek, and drove away as if the morning were ordinary. Inside that apartment, 1 man was dead. 1 woman was fighting to survive. And Thompson's next move would prove just how little remorse he had left. After leaving the scene, Charles Thompson didn't run far. He went to the home of a friend, sat down on her couch, and fell asleep. When he woke up hours later, the morning news was on. A report flashed across the screen about a shooting in North Harris County. 1 man dead, 1 woman critically injured. His friend noticed his swollen face and joked that she hoped the other guy looked worse. Thompson looked at her and answered calmly. He said the other man was dead. Then he told her everything. He described shooting Darren Kaine. He described shooting Denise in the face. It wasn't an emotional breakdown or a moment of regret. It was a confession delivered like a recap. And in that moment, he made her the most dangerous witness in his life. Back at the apartment, deputies found Denise sitting in a pool of blood, barely able to breathe. Despite the damage to her face and tongue, she was conscious. When asked who shot her, she nodded. Later, she passed a handwritten note to her brother with 3 words that said everything. Chuck did this. Denise was airlifted to the hospital where doctors fought to save her. The injuries were severe and complications set in. Days later, her family was forced to make an impossible decision. Denise was taken off life support. She was 39 years old. Her teenage son would grow up without his mother. For most people, that would have been the end of denial. For Charles Thompson, it was the beginning of a new story, one where he claimed he wasn't the killer at all. He blamed the hospital. From the moment Charles Thompson was locked up, he understood one thing clearly. Witnesses were his biggest threat. And instead of preparing for trial, he focused on eliminating them. While sitting in the Harris County Jail, Thompson began approaching other inmates with a plan. He wanted Diane, the woman who heard his confession, silenced. He spoke openly about hiring someone to take care of her, offering cash and detailed instructions, addresses, vehicles, daily routines. Nothing was vague. What Thompson didn't realise was that jailhouse walls don't keep secrets. One of the inmates tipped off authorities, and investigators set a trap. An undercover officer posed as a hitman and met Thompson in a visiting booth, recording every word. Thompson slid a hand-drawn map against the glass, pointing out where he had dumped the gun and where his target lived. He wanted proof when it was done. And that wasn't the only plan. Thompson shared a list of names with another inmate, people he believed could testify against him. The instructions were simple. Make sure they never showed up. The inmate listening to all of this wasn't an ally. He was a long-time informant documenting everything. By the time Thompson's trial began, prosecutors didn't just see a jealous ex-boyfriend. They saw a man willing to keep killing even from behind bars. But despite all of that, Thompson still believed he could outsmart the system. And in a way, he did, at least for a while. By 2005, Charles Thompson had already been sentenced to die once. After a court overturned his original death sentence on a technical violation, a new jury was brought in. They heard the evidence. They heard about the murders. They heard about the hit lists. And they sentenced him to death again. Thompson was being held in the Harris County Jail, waiting to be transferred back to death row. He was supposed to be under the tightest supervision available. Instead, he was quietly preparing something no one thought possible. Using a legal binder, Thompson smuggled contraband into his cell: a handcuff key, a fake ID badge, and civilian clothes: khakis, a blue shirt, tennis shoes. Somehow, no one caught it. Somehow, no one reported it. On November 3, 2005, just 6 days after being sentenced to die, Thompson was taken to a visitation room. After the visitor left, Thompson slipped out of his cuffs, changed clothes, and covered his inmate ID so it looked official. Then he stood up and walked out. He flashed the fake badge at guard after guard. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He passed through the jail, crossed the lobby, and walked straight out the front door into downtown Houston. A man sentenced to death had just escaped without force, without weapons, and without resistance. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Thompson was already gone. And the families he had terrorized were left wondering if he was coming for them next. Once outside the jail, Charles Thompson didn't panic. He adapted. He slipped into a rail yard, climbed into a freight car, and rode east through Texas like someone chasing freedom instead of running from a death sentence. Later, he would describe it as an adventure. Dirty, uncomfortable, but exhilarating. He eventually surfaced in Louisiana. With no money and no plan beyond staying invisible, Thompson took advantage of the moment. Hurricane Katrina had displaced thousands, and he began posing as an evacuee. Strangers handed him food, cash, and supplies, never realizing who they were helping. The escape lasted 3 days. On November 6th, police received a tip and found Thompson outside a liquor store in Shreveport, drunk and laughing while using a payphone. He was trying to arrange money to flee the country. When officers asked his name, he didn't resist. He smirked and identified himself. Witnesses later said he treated the arrest like a joke.